Rachel. How are you going?
Well, I'm going good. We've got a surprise for everybody tonight. Scott looks a bit different.
That's right. Yes, we've changed it up. Hopefully he's looking after Liam at the moment, so...
Yes.
Yes.
Fingers crossed that he's getting seen to and looked after at the
Yes,
moment.
that's right. There's all sorts of things happening this year, so it's keeping us all just staying focused on God, otherwise we all go a bit mental. So, yeah. So
what Faye and I are going to try and fill Scott's shoes tonight, and have a discussion around our last 2 weeks of the readings that we've had on Wednesday.
Yes.
And feel free to anytime ask any questions or make a comment or share your experiences. We're going to try and do a little bit of a summary too, and see how that goes. But we may come back another night and do the summary, depending on how you guys feel like you need to connect or do something like that. We'll see how we go. Let us know if you'd like a separate night to come and do a summary of the whole Lenten journey for 2022.
It's sometimes hard when the weeks fly by to remember. Unless you journal and keep it all written down, you sort of go, oh, what week was that? And,
Yeah. So we'll see how we go. Today we're looking at John 19. Is that right? No, Luke 19. John 12 and Luke 19.
Yes, that's right.
How did you go? How have you been going with them, Faye, over the last couple of weeks?
I must admit, the first couple, it was more I just like just sitting and having that peaceful time and that just to listen to the music and let the words sort of wash over. I think I typed in when we were chatting on the other times that there wasn't anything outstanding that came to me or anything like that. It was just more the fact that I had the time and the space and just realizing Easter was coming and being appreciative of that and the discipline of sitting down to that time.
Coming with intent to
yes,
have space and time with God.
That's right.
Yeah.
But last week on the 6th, so is that Martha and Mary last time? Lazarus? Yes, it was.
Yeah, so Jenny read to us, not tonight, but the week before.
Yes, week before.
And that was where Jesus and the disciples were having a meal with Lazarus, who had just been resurrected.
Resurrected. Yeah. Martha and Mary. Yeah. What I found, I did do some journaling that week, and luckily when you rang me, I thought, oh, actually, I did do some journaling on the week. So, but I think for me sometimes, and this is probably what I do is just see as the story is being read to just picture the story, and I always find that quite helpful at times. So for me, I was picturing the scene, and it was a reminder to me that Martha, we always talk about Mary and Martha, well, Martha was still serving, and Mary was still the one that was worshipping and showing devotion, which I thought was interesting, that her insight into Jesus had not changed. She was still wanting to sit at his feet and learn, and this time she was actually pouring the perfume over his feet. So she seemed to have a great deal of insight in what was going to happen to Jesus. She was just, really worshipping him. So, and there's poor Martha still serving. So whether she learnt anything or whether it was just a reminder to me that for us sometimes there's still that serving and that typical way of living that has to be carried out. But not to forget the worship side of it, time to just sit and to adore and, So that was some of the things I reflected on. Yes.
No, that's good. I think that's really good to bring in the fact that there are two different ways in which our spirituality occurs and is within us. That of being Martha and that of being Mary.
Yes.
And that
not to neglect one or the like.
Yeah.
Like I remember people saying to me years ago at church, I can't do or can't serve coffee, or I can't do. I've actually got to pray, or I'm a spiritual person. I said, well, that's really nice, but could you just let somebody else space too while you do this? Like in other words, sometimes we have to get off our backsides and be practical and serve to help others and to serve our church and but if we neglect the time to sit down and just be and to really worship our God, well, then we stay one-sided or one-dimensional, don't we?
There's a balance between it too, but it's also in some ways how you connect with that time with God. Some people find it easier listening to a podcast or listening to something like this while they're walking or while they're doing gardening or housework or something, rather than just sitting down and listening to it. So that might not work, Faye, because you're sideways now. So it's also a way in which that helps you connect with the way in which you connect with God. Is there a process of serving and doing, or is there a process of sitting and being? And it's not saying that one or the other is right, but it's more about reflecting on your own journey and bringing that awareness to yourself. I don't know whether you can. You're gone again. Whether you can turn your screen around. You've just gone sideways. Anyway, we might continue on. Faye seems to be having just a little bit of internet strength issues. So we will continue on, and hopefully Faye will come back, because we've lost Faye's voice too. So we will continue on as we go. I was actually sitting with that at the moment and trying to work out what would it be like to be having a meal with a man who for 4 days had been dead and now is having a meal with you and sitting down and having a conversation with you. And that for me was just a moment of sitting and reflecting with that. And working out, there she is again. And just having a moment where I was sitting with the concept of having a meal with a man who had been only dead a few days ago or however. Someone from Facebook has just said, some of those ways of relationship with God sound similar to love languages you hear about. Yeah. Have you muted yourself by any chance, Faye? Something happened when you changed position before. No, still not getting a conversation with you. Maybe if Chris is watching, he can give Faye a ring and see whether or not he can help Faye to work out what the sound issue is, because we've got you back on full screen now, so that's good. So we've got another question is, how could you have a normal meal with a person who is dead, and what would you talk about to him? And I think that's exactly where you would sit with that. So I would ponder, what questions would you ask, or what would the conversation be? And I think I would just be sitting listening to the conversations that were being had in the room, but particularly with Jesus and Lazarus, who by all stretch of the imagination was not something that you were expecting would have ever happened or you would have been witness to. So I also sat with that space of knowing that a real statement was made with Jesus bringing Lazarus back from the dead. That who Jesus was being shown to be Lord. It wasn't anybody else. It was definitely shown to be Lord by bringing Lazarus back from the dead, even though there had been different conversation, different situations that had been had with Jesus bringing very sick people back from the dead, and some were questioned to be dead in those situations, but Jesus said that they weren't, and that it wasn't necessarily as definite as someone being dead for 4 days and then intentionally staying away for that to happen. I'm just going to turn Faye off for the moment so she can fix her computer, and then maybe she can come back in. She might give me a thumbs up when she's ready or can find a way to come back in. So it is definitely a statement that has been made, and that the talk and the grapevine was definitely happening by this point in time, because it wasn't just the people in Bethany who had been there. So I was sitting with the concept of what the exterior, so the interior being the meal that was being had with Jesus and Lazarus at that time, and what that would look like in an exterior, so being outside that meal, and the conversations that were being had and talked about there. It would have been an interesting meal, I think. I would think that just sitting in that space of what's happening and what's going on. I then had a moment where I was just sitting with Mary washing Jesus' feet, and Judas telling her off for wasting the money that she did, and then Jesus standing up and defending her and telling Judas to, in some senses, get back in his box. So the part that we don't hear in that was that Mary actually said nothing, that Jesus said something before Mary, and that would I do that? Would I sit there and be able to allow Jesus to defend myself without actually saying anything? Could I do that? So Faye will try her other computer. So that's good, Faye. Thanks for that. Keep trying. And then so sitting in that moment of being the person placing me within that steps of washing Jesus' feet and being told off for doing that and putting perfume on his feet. And the vulnerable position in some senses that is. But then not saying anything and allowing Jesus to defend me, would I be able to do that? But then what does that situation look like with a risen Christ? So for me today, what does that look like? Do I need to defend myself? There we go. We've got one on Faye. I'm going to try and bring Faye in. So we've got one on. Oops.
I've got to turn the other one off.
There we go. Oops. Got to turn the other. There we go.
Now I seem to have both going at once, so that's weird.
Let's see if I can remove that guest. How about that?
That's better. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Faye.
Very
that
good.
Is excellent.
I promise I didn't touch anything before, but it just went strange. Now, see, it comes up with a sign.
So we've just had someone from, I would say, YouTube just asked us to pray for their husband, that he comes to Christ and our marriage is restored and rebuilt on the rock. His name is Ozzy. So we'll definitely pray for Ozzy and ask God to hold you both and hold you and your relationship.
Definitely.
Not a problem. We will continue that that prayer for you for the rest of this week. That will be offered to you as well.
So someone else lost his faith.
Yeah. So we'll definitely ask God to hold you and wrap his arms around you and even Ozzy too to draw you both closer to him. So where I left off was, what does this situation look like with a risen Christ? When we don't do we constantly need to say something? And I think this was brought more into highlight with our next reading, but of why I probably was sitting in this space. But what does the situation look like with risen Christ and not having to defend myself and just allowing that space to be, because it's different when Jesus is sitting in the same room as you and or someone else is sitting in the same room as you. But what does that look like when you have a risen Christ? Does it look any different? And I think that was some of the things that I was sitting and playing with around that God brings people there around you to defend you for sure. And that's why it's important to be present to the moment. But but also too that, yeah, it's still something that I'm sitting with, but it was definitely something that I sat with at the time.
Yep.
How about you, Faye? Did you
I sort of still thinking a bit about Lazarus, because we concentrate now at Easter time about Christ, or Jesus going to the cross, and he's the resurrected one, and yet Lazarus preceded that. So what was that showing? Why did Jesus do it that way? What was that showing? Because
well, I sort of reflected while you were probably trying to get your computer back on, reflected on my space of, yes, eating that meal with Jesus, but it was definitely a statement being made. He paused before he went there. And that Jesus was shown to be Lord. There was no misconception that the man was dead. He was dead. Where there was a little bit of ambiguity between other miracles that had happened with children and other people who had only either, that the parents thought were dead is the one that I was coming to mind, and Jesus said, no, she's just asleep. So there was a little bit of ambiguity on whether or not the person or the individual was dead that Jesus was bringing back to life.
That's right.
But here was a definite statement that you can't get much more than a man being in the tomb for 4 days, and
yes,
Jesus saying, come on out.
So just to proceed to show that he could raise from the dead.
Yeah.
And that, a precursor, I suppose, to what was going to happen.
Yeah. Did you think where did you head with yours? Was yours just a question, or did it lead anywhere?
What I led to again was it was another bodily resurrection, or the first bodily resurrection, because I've been thinking a lot lately about the fact that we talk a lot about Jesus being resurrected, and it was a bodily resurrection. Yes, body, not the same body and able to go through walls and all those things, but it was a definite bodily resurrection, as Lazarus was. So for me, thinking about this has been, sometimes we just wash over it, but that's,
Yeah.
I mean, they're sitting down having a meal with someone who's been dead. Come on, people. This is, as you said, if you're sitting down with someone, what was it like? Do you remember anything? How did you, did you remember being dead?
what was happening when I wasn't here, or like those conversations that were there. So sitting in that, I just don't think I could fathom.
There's Martha still just serving as though, this is a normal occurrence. But Mary realised that this Jesus that had brought Lazarus back, was more than just a master. There was, he had to be God's son to be able to do this. And it seemed to me that he might have been telling them that he's going to Jerusalem to die, and she seemed to get it, to put the perfume on his feet and wipe his feet with her hair. There was just this sense of, I need to do this for you, so the whole thing is, sometimes we just read the text and go on, and then we just, and suddenly you go, wow, this is totally amazing. Let's,
Yeah, there's part of it for me about sitting in what's literally being said, and then there's part of me that wants to allow that metaphoric exploration to give space for that. But I think for me, it is around the fact that this person was dead. We just can't. I mean, we've got doctors and stuff who perform miracles today in their own sense through God's blessing upon their skills and abilities.
Mm.
But to that extent, we're just like, sometimes it's hard to grasp or hold on to. It's not that we it's something that you just can't sometimes place yourself there on how that would occur.
That's right.
So did anybody else have any comments about their journey through John 12? 2 weeks, well, last week it was. I think there was a couple of comments around could you have a normal meal knowing that had happened, or being aware that had happened, and what would you talk about with him? So definitely
an amazing but I think, God was saying, this is my son Jesus. This is, Lazarus has been raised from the dead. So remember this when Jesus is, because at this time they still don't comprehend what was going to happen to Jesus. Yes, he set his face to Jerusalem, but maybe Mary's got insight, but the others, Judas is just worried about money, and we know later on the disciples don't really understand the full impact. So, but I guess that all leads into our next reading, doesn't it? When Jesus is coming into Jerusalem.
It does. So Judy very kindly led us in this week's reading. Where did you start, Faye, with your reflections on this one? Or just before you do, Facebook has just asked, very much a foreshadowing.
Yes.
Also interesting to reflect how the disciples didn't cope when Jesus rose. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. But maybe when Jesus rose, the fact that they will remember Lazarus, makes it all more credible that, they'll remember that Jesus has raised Lazarus. When Jesus himself rises, we don't hear that comment anymore about Lazarus, but
no, Lazarus was almost like,
but surely they must have remembered then that Lazarus, had been.
Yeah. I guess the devastation of mourning something that you thought was going to be completely different. Could have overridden the remembering of Lazarus. Maybe that's why Jesus had that time there of raising Lazarus, was to help remember later on.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. So our Luke reading, do you want to share, Faye, where you went with your reading?
I guess it's just Jesus set his face to Jerusalem. He was willing to go because God's sort of sending him. But he took charge. He didn't just go kicking and screaming. He more or less said, go to the village, get the colt, untie it, bring it to me. He didn't just go. I kind of thought I would be trying not to go, and I'd be sort of, but he took charge.
I mean, there was that, probably just expanding outside this text, but there was a time before he moved to Jerusalem or headed to Jerusalem where he had a conversation with Peter that Peter didn't want him to go.
Yes, that's right.
But that in itself is it's almost, that's put behind everybody else. That's what I noticed too. Jesus was in front.
Yes,
he was the man
right.
on a mission. He had, and there was almost a sense of a time, a schedule. The schedule was happening and was in play. Definitely there. I
Yes.
had a chuckle around verse 33 in the sense that Jesus said, if someone asks you why you're untying the colt, just say that the Lord needs it.
Yes. Yes,
And
that's right.
true to form,
Yep.
the question was asked, they
Yeah.
stated it, and nothing else was said. Just as
Yeah.
simple as that. I just went, would
Yep.
you be used to that as one of his disciples? Like, that must have been happening more than
Yep.
once or twice. Like, I would have expected it to be a familiar
Yes. Yeah.
experience for them. Would they have had a chuckle to themselves as the experience of going and being sent on a errand to get this colt? So,
And then when I reflected on it, we do take, Passion Sunday to granted or Palm Sunday. We've heard the story so many times. But there's no real, we know he's heading to Jerusalem. But for me, why were the crowd so excited to see someone riding on a donkey? You think it'd be a thing of ridicule. But here it's though.
well, is a colt a male horse? Has it been?
Yeah, not roped
de-sexed?
in. Yeah, it's still only young though, isn't it? It's not a
So it
donkey
hasn't
in
been
this story.
de-sexed. It's still just a
Yeah.
young horse.
Yes.
So that's an interesting comparison with the different gospels too.
That's right, with the donkey, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's still not a big white steed or anything.
No.
And yet people are praising God, and they seem to recognize at this time that it is that Jesus is Lord and he's King, and they're crying out their blessings and all of that on him.
Chris has just made a comment around that there's often a comparison between the crowd in this reading and that on Friday before Pilate. So the opposite to the crowds where they were going praise him and or thanking God for him.
Now there is today. Yes.
And and no, crucify him.
Very soon after.
The Pharisees.
Yes.
But nothing suggests that they are the same people either. And where were these people on the Friday? Yeah. Where are we when we are called to stand up?
Yes.
And I think that too is where my comparison, where that John reading comes in, and what does it look like? Do I have to defend myself all the time? Do I have to justify myself all the time? Or can I allow a risen Christ to do that? And I think that's probably where that sort of comes into it too, is that where were we when Jesus needed to be defended, or where were the crowds of people, or the followers, it specifically says, that those followers, people have suggested that that these were the people who were following Jesus, probably living and traveling with him, but just not the 12 disciples. And they're saying that there would have been a few hundred of them, maybe more.
Well, that's
maybe
right.
more.
And they've been around seeing miracles happen. So I've no doubt that they've been following these miracles. And perhaps that's why, they're expecting this great thing. And of course, we know they're Jewish people. So there is the history of expecting the Messiah to come. So I think their expectation is that this is the person, this is the Lord, and they're
So I always had the understanding that it was the townspeople that were doing this, laying the palm leaves and putting the cloaks down, but it actually wasn't. I mean, they could have been participating, but it specifically says Jesus' followers, not the townspeople. It was his followers. So that was an interesting insight for me that I maybe hadn't necessarily grasped the full intention of what that was stating. But as Chris said, where were they on the Friday? That these people who were multiple people, enough to be noted and seen, were definitely maybe not there. Maybe they were trying to be inconspicuous.
Well, probably like Peter trying to, the fear comes into it. And I think for most of us, I think fear can be a hard thing to overcome.
I don't know that I would have been there on the Friday.
No.
I think that I would have tried to be inconspicuous to some extent.
Well, at this stage, of course, Jesus hadn't been arrested, so they're out.
No, so we're still sitting there.
So we're free. They're free to worship and call out and say Hosanna. It's a different story when he's been arrested and there's soldiers around and all of those things. So the situation changes then, and then how strong are you to stand up? And that's the same with us in our Christian faith. It's okay while everything's going easily and well, but how do we go when things are against us?
And how recognizing Christ standing with us, God standing with us in that space, that we're never left alone in that God is closer than we realize. So sometimes it's a matter of our unbelief becoming belief, and maybe that reflects back to the Lazarus journey of believing that it happened, what actually happened. So did you go anywhere else, Faye?
What struck me, the words were right down at the end of the reading in verse 40. The Pharisees told the crowd, or said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples, tell them to be quiet." And he said, "I tell you, if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." And I thought, I don't know, this is creation, cannot deny God or
I must admit, I probably wasn't going to say this, but since you've brought it up, Faye, I sit with that and go that they're just working out that living things have a sound to them. That the energy that's going through them actually has a sound. I don't know whether you've seen them on Facebook or whatever. There's like a little iPod that's going back a bit looking device that you plug onto plants. And it actually translates the energy that's going through the plants into music, so you can hear the song that the plant's making, which I think is fascinating. But they're working out that each of how to do that. So there's part of me that goes, but they are they were singing just as much as what the disciples were. The plants were around and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I don't know that they've done that with rocks, but although they have actually, that's how they find planets apparently, or partly of when they find the planets, that they can actually look at the different sound waves that the planets make.
Right, fascinating and way beyond my scope of.
Yeah, so this sort of just goes, even though this is not what the text is actually suggesting, and I'm bringing modern day concepts in here, that there is. So I'm just reading a Facebook comment that all of creation would cry out, but we are given the choice. Yeah,
that's right, exactly. Yeah. I mean, what they're saying is God created, so the rocks and all creation recognize this.
Yeah.
And yet we humans are the ones that are given the choice, but creation will still
cry out, even though
Yeah. And,
Oh, I like that, Faye. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that sits for me.
And nothing's going to stop God. Creation recognize that, but we humans we as it is now, they're praising him, and another day they're not going to be. And we're like that. I can be like that. One day I feel really close to God, and another time I'm, have my doubts, or I forget to.
Yeah, there's some days that I go, this emotion stuff is just crap. One day you feel fine, the next day you're going, oh.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And I think that's when you have to stand on the truth of God and know that he's always with you, not necessarily in your emotions.
Yeah, sitting with that space of God beyond my emotions, God beyond my feelings, God beyond my thought. And that in itself sometimes is really hard to grasp, but that's where we're sort of moving to in this space, or God's calling us to, is that you are more than just your humanness.
Yes, that's right.
That there is a spiritual element to you. So, and maybe that's where that John reading fits back in with Mary washing and Martha, and our discussion around the spiritual practices and how you engage the spiritual practices through the examples of Martha's doing and Mary's sitting and listening. That recognition, when we have those times where our emotions get too big, or the situation just shuts us down, or and we know that we're more than what we're feeling, but it's really hard to get out of that space, is knowing how to connect and to connect with God and allow God to hold you in that rest and peace to move through that period of time. And maybe that's how those two connections, those two readings also work too, is that space. But yeah, sitting with that God calling us out and crying out, but yet the next breath that we'll read as our Maundy Thursday appears, and our Good Friday readings as services appear too, that that things will change,
that's right.
Humans, that our human nature of fear, and it's interesting when you start pulling back the layers, that it all revolves around fear, the fear of ourself, or of our identity of who we are disappearing. And
for us, we have the Bible, and we're sitting in this side of it, aren't we? But for these people, as you put yourself in the text and in the story, they don't know the ending like we do.
Yeah.
They're living it as we're reading it. We kind of reading with hindsight, and it's hard for us to understand perhaps and say, well, why didn't they get it? But we don't always get it. we don't understand fully, so I think putting yourself in the story and being part of the crowd, and to just sit, sometimes it makes it more real and alive. Sometimes not just read the text without imagining or using that, putting yourself in that story and in that picture. Somebody's written, both readings reflect a choice to worship, Martha and the crowd.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or Mary, Martha, and the crowd.
Mary, Martha, and the crowd.
Was Mary and Martha part of the crowd?
Yeah, could have been. I bet they were. Yes.
I was going to say, would you stay in Bethany while Jesus went to?
No, I'd be going. Yeah, that's right. And to me, sometimes Martha gets a hard deal because she still was serving her Lord.
Absolutely.
She's seen Lazarus raised, and that's where all our personalities are different.
And to some extent, Martha and the crowd are doing something. They're both actively doing something.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
But it was the time. It was a time to be active. It was a time to actually do something and participate in the journey of the cross, or to that Jerusalem moment for Jesus. That it wasn't time of sitting and listening as it had been for Mary most of the time. But I can't say that Mary would have been back home sitting and
No, I think they would have all
praying,
been.
I think she would have been participating too, which therefore brings into the space of being able to have a balance of both, that there are times where God's going to call us to participate and times that God's going to call us to do things other than sitting and listening and praying. But there are times that God's going to call us to do that as well. And it's about being present and learning how to see that and how to understand that. And I think that sometimes can be really difficult and hard to decipher at times, especially when you don't feel like doing anything, or you have one of those, oh, I have no energy and I just feel totally spent. But God's asking you to still participate and what that looks like. So it's also learning those different ways in which the Holy Spirit brings you around to that, but also what those different ways look like as well. I don't know that that's explaining it too clear, but
it's true. Yeah. You know, I mean, people have commented about the choice to worship. Well, the Pharisees were still rebuking, weren't they? Rebuke your disciples.
They were.
They didn't want this. Jesus more or less was saying, you're not going to stop this. You can try, but it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
God's got a plan. And as somebody says, this is fulfilling prophecy. So nothing was going to stop it. This is God. It's God's plan, God's control.
God's
and that's
in control.
We've already had the resurrection. There's going to be another one. Nothing's going to stop it. And I think for us, we've got to understand that too. In our waiting for our new building and things like that, there is a plan. God has a plan, and we need to participate where we need to. Be still and patient where we need to, pray where we need to, but also trust.
Who was it that had is it a prayer or a saying or something? I think it was one of the I don't know that it was Francis, but it could have been, where they say, I've got to learn to go, help me to go when you tell me to go and help me to stop when you tell me to stop.
Yes. Yeah, there's a song, I think, too, somewhere, but yeah.
I think for me, that verse 39, that first part of that Luke reading, was the most relative to life at the moment and our experiences that we've been through as society as a whole. Because how many times do I say to someone, stop doing something because I don't like it or I don't think it's right? And we've just come out of a really intense space in our world where everybody's voice is important, or everybody has the right to voice their opinions.
But they want that opinion to be the right one, not anybody else's.
Your opinion is right and all that kind of stuff. And in some senses, that reminds me of the Pharisees going, are you going to rebuke your followers? Come on. So in that space of that slippage for me of bringing it into the now, going, we've still got that issue. And what happens when do I note within myself whether it's my opinion, or do I think that it's something more than what I am? And how do I sit within a world and within a community when people don't agree with me? And I think that in itself has the understanding that God's drawing us beyond those spaces, and that sometimes our opinions, even though they're good to be heard and voiced, when it becomes more forceful or becomes something that is denying community life and space, that is actually causing death within the community or abusive to somebody else, that I need to note that, and I need to understand that it's not always about my opinions or my rightness, that there is a bigger picture of community rather than just individual here.
Yeah. I think that's a really important thing. I think the hardest thing as a Christian sometimes is to not want to hold on to your own rightness and to be allow your voice, and then to be able to let it go as well.
Yeah. Especially coming out of like the last 20 years where we've been more in either intimidated or a bit more quiet with our voices for most of us. Some Christian communities haven't been, but I think for most of us, we have not necessarily voiced it in concern. Maybe that's the Good Friday reflection of that, but that we are we've gone through a bit of a journey as community and as individuals to go, the world needs to hear, or my community needs to hear my opinion, but that doesn't mean that I need to force it down their neck. And what does that look like when I am aware of community and that my individualism doesn't overtake community? Yeah.
I think it depends what we're trying to tell. Is it something we just want so that we're right about something, or is it because we want people to know the hope of God? And and even then we still have to tell why we have that hope and share and leave the rest to the Holy Spirit to work in people's lives, I guess.
Yeah.
But we've got to be the partnering with our voice as well as allowing the Spirit to move within their lives.
Knowing the difference between my opinion and my hope or my faith is an interesting one too. And a journey that we all need to go on. Otherwise, that's when it can be very much like the Pharisees in their leading of God's church in those days.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Anyway, so does anyone else have anything to say about the Luke reading? We'll open that one up and just give a few more minutes. But overall, Faye, how have you, we've talked a little bit about in earlier live sessions around how hard it is to grasp when you're sitting in silence, just allowing your attention to be drawn to particular phrases, words and images or feelings and sitting there. How do you know what's God's voice? How do you know where God is within that? And I think that's still something that I think all of us have to deal with, but we've talked a little bit about that. Is there anything else that you found when you was sitting with it? Maybe
I don't actually sit there and say, is this God's voice or not? Because I think if God's Spirit's working in our lives, then those things will come, and I think it's all from God. And then it gets a bit of a sieve, as Scott often likes to say, the sift and the sifting and the sieving. Is that a word? Yep. Sifting.
I'll go with it.
Well, it sifts through, doesn't it? And so you might have a thing pop up, but if it's of God, it'll stay and it'll bring you closer to God or to somebody else, or to learning about yourself, to understand the Bible a bit more. Those sort of things will come from it. And other things will just, drift away again. So I kind of don't sit there and say, oh, is this of God or not? I just kind of allow it to. And the more you're in tune with God, I guess, in your own way, not everybody else's way, just your own, I think these things will just come to you a bit more. So I think sometimes we can be too, is this of God or isn't it of God? But
so in other words, just breathe through the process and don't worry about it at this point in time.
Yeah, and let those things unfold as they come from the word and the text. And the more you spend time with it, then it'll come more easily, more naturally. And but everybody's different of how they journey. But we sometimes, I think, have high expectations of our sitting time, and we want a big revelation, or we want God to be really present, and maybe it's just, and sometimes you'll have that, and other times it'll be, okay, right, yep, okay, I've just sat and that's okay, and now I'll get on and do the dishes or whatever. But it's all God working in your life. So
I think the important part,
kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think the important part is to come with intent, that you have time and space, that you're coming to God with intent just to be with God, not to talk necessarily to God, not to tell him about your day or ask him for prayer for people or your life or whatever's happening around you. But there's a time in which you just sit and be with God with the intent of just, I always imagine it as, sometimes you just want to be around someone. You don't want to talk to them. You don't want to have them, but just to have them there next to you or in the same room as you. And that's what I sort of liken it to, is that there's just an intent just to be with God, just to have that space with God.
Yep. And other times out of that will come a more intense time, or prayer, or thoughts of somebody, or so let it unravel, let it be what God brings to the time and the space.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe that's where you have your little notepad behind you. Some days you're not going to have anything that really comes to you, and other days you might have a few things that you just want to jot down next to you, even if it's just dot point sentences or words or whatever comes to you.
Very valuable, yeah.
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 So
yeah,
it's all an interesting space. We haven't necessarily summed up too much today, but we have been talking a lot about the last 2 weeks. And I'm just aware that we're sneaking towards the hour mark. So is there anyone who has any comments, who wants to share any experiences of journey that they've had? And maybe whether or not you can leave a comment if you're watching after. We've posted this after we've gone live. Feel free to leave comments in the boxes, comments below. We can still see them and we still get them, and we'll respond to you or give you a call or something like that. So
I just think it's been valuable without meeting together as a community or a church. I think the time's been valuable, and also it's there for people to go back and have that time if they haven't had time yet, or so I think it's been a worthwhile experience.
I know I valued it. Just connecting and hearing different questions coming in, and that just helps to create our community when we're not currently meeting at the moment. And for me, that's an important part, because I don't always get to talk with everybody during the week. So I value that too.
And of course, the purpose is that we're preparing ourselves for Good Friday and for the amazing resurrection. And this is
absolutely.
Yeah.
So while I think of it, Faye, we have a Maundy Thursday service tomorrow, which Glennis will be reading through our reading for us, and she always does a fantastic job with us with her readings. And her and Graham are in our thoughts and prayers at the moment too.
That's right. Yeah.
And that will be at the Maundy Thursday service is at 7:30. Hang on, let me just check that.
That's right, 7:30.
7:30, excellent. I've got my bit of paper over here. There we go. Yep. And then we have our Good Friday service, where Scott will do a reflection for us. And then, Faye, you're going to continue on with our readings after Scott's reflection, and that will be at 9 o'clock. So that will be also available. And Sunday, we're not missing out on the dawn service.
No.
Scott has kindly still got up at 6:30 and done the dawn service for us. So he will come to us at 6:30 a.m. From his backyard, I believe. And he will lead us through that time. And there will be a couple of songs that we can sing at home together. And that will be a good time of sharing and being there, continuing the story of having to wait and follow by the rules of your tradition and your faith and your community to wait to go and see Jesus' body and to do what he needed to do, but then to find nothing there. Like that anticipation and that wait for Saturday must have taken so long for that to happen.
Especially, yeah.
So, yeah. And then we have our 10 o'clock service as normal. So they will be at those specific times. They will be posted at those specific times. And we're not meeting at the park either this week due to the it being Easter Resurrection Sunday. So we hope that you spend...
Lots of people might be away, so we can, the good thing is if you're away, you can still avail yourself when you can of these different services that are being offered. So that's good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're always there and available to watch too. Anyway, Faye, I value you being here and talking with me tonight.
Thank you for sharing, Rachel, and thanks for putting all these things together for us.
The conversation has just exploded my mind. I've got more to think about and sit and reflect on now. So that's been good. Scott, if you're watching, or and Liam and Nicole, and we're just
going well
of you at the moment, and hope that you're being looked after and cared for in town, and we will hear the stories, no doubt, when Scott returns and shares with us that Liam's okay. And I think he has shared that tonight, that Liam's doing okay. So that is good. Let us know if you would like a reflection or a summary of the whole Lenten journey. And Scott and I and Faye might come back on next time and talk with that. But leave us a comment in the like a yes or no whether you would like to hear a summary and to help summarize the journey of Lent that we've had this year in the comments. Thank you, Faye.
Thank you, Rachel.
It has been an honour talking with you, an absolute blessing hearing what you've got to say. Thanks for everybody for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. Good night.